Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for We Talk Mental Health. My name is Karen, as always, and today we are going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder a little bit more again, but also complex post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as kind of touching on something that's very, very near and dear to my heart, which is mental health and the military. So if you haven't watched last week's video about trauma and stress-related disorders, I will link it in the description. There are a number of trauma and stress-related disorders, and the one that we did not talk about in last week's video, even though it wasn't last week's video because I was very sick last week and didn't get a video up, so it's been 2 weeks since I put a video up. But in our last video, we talked about trauma and stress-related disorders, and the one that we didn't talk about, because it's not technically included in the DSM-5, is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that it's very important to kind of talk about this because it shares a lot of the same diagnostic characteristics as post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's diagnosed in people who have experienced prolonged extreme exposure to a traumatic event or abuse. And it causes a lot of the same signs and symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder, such as reliving the traumatic experience, avoiding certain situations, changes in beliefs and feelings about yourself and others, hyperarousal, somatic symptoms, lack of emotional regulation, changes in consciousness, negative self-perception, difficulty with relationships, distorted perception of abuser, and loss of systems of meaning. So a lot of those same characteristics exist with post-traumatic stress disorder, but the difference is that there are a lot of additional symptoms that exist that make it much more complex. And as always, for treatment, it's important to, as I talked about in our last video, meet with somebody and work with somebody who is experienced in trauma-focused treatment. The reason why I wanted to kind of touch on that is because it's a diagnosis that I think is becoming more common within the military realm of trauma. And for those of you who might not know, I've been a member of the Air National Guard for almost 10 years now, and the military is a very important part of my life. I come from a long line of military members. Both of my grandfathers, my dad, my brother, an uncle, my aunt have all served our country, and I actually met my husband when I was deployed in Afghanistan. So it's very near and dear to my heart, and I've seen the effects both personally and through friends or family who have experienced trauma related to combat or war. I've seen the effects of PTSD and C-PTSD and how it impacts a person and their families and their friends. So mental health in the military is something that has been taken more seriously over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, but it's still not taken seriously enough. As a member of the military, this is my opinion, and I'm not speaking ill in any sort of way. I just believe as a social worker that there is so much more that they can be doing in order to help prevent prolonged exposure to trauma, or how veteran is impacted after they come home from seeing combat and seeing trauma. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, and early on in my career I worked with an agency where I did an assessment of the agency because they wanted to be more open and inclusive to military personnel and their family members. Because not only is there a stigma in the normal population of non-military members for mental health, but it's almost doubled within the military culture, because we're programmed, and I hate to say that, but we're programmed when we go into basic training that the mission comes first and you come second. Nothing but the mission ever matters. You do what you're supposed to be doing, and then you take care of yourself after. And if you're struggling mentally, it's a weakness. So that's something that really I struggled with for a long time because of who I am as a person and what I do as a profession, and then being brought into this type of culture where we don't talk about feeling depressed or feeling anxious, and we don't talk about the things that we've seen. So I have not been in a position or experienced direct combat. I have a job that doesn't require me to be in any type of frontline situation, but I have deployed, and that environment changes you as a person. So there are still a lot of things that affect me in terms of fireworks. I used to love them, and they're harder for me now because it just kind of sends me back there. And, you know, I did experience mortars and, you know, incoming flying over the base, and the base potentially being hit, and the alarm going off all the time. So, and having to get under the tables or having to go into the bunkers, and it's a heightened sense of awareness that changes you. And it's been a long time since I was there, but it still kind of, you know, sticks with you in some senses, and you are able to work through it, and I've been able to work through it, but it definitely impacted me. And I still have a really hard time in crowds because I have to have this constant feeling of situational awareness and knowing where the exits are, and I don't like having my back to like a big room of people. And my husband is oftentimes the same way, and he has his own stories, and, you know, without his permission, I'm not gonna talk about the things that he's been through. Maybe I can get him to agree to do a video one day, but I don't know if that'll ever happen. We sit in these death by PowerPoint type of trainings yearly, which talk about sexual assault in the military, talks about suicide, they talk about resiliency and how important that is, but we still don't openly talk about being depressed or being anxious or struggling with trauma. And it's like this elephant in the room constantly, and it makes me want to do more. And I guess maybe this video is me trying to kind of get that message out there, that even though mental health is more talked about and a little bit more accepted within the military, we still have leaps and bounds to go, because we're still, you know, that stigma that if you are open and honest about your struggles with mental health when you're in the military means that you're going to be discharged, and that's not the truth. That's a myth. And we talked about myths associated with military mental health this past Monday on WeTalk, and you can check out our Instagram to kind of see what those were. When 20% of the veterans who served in either the Iraq or Afghanistan wars come home with either major depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, and then 19.5% of those vets also have experienced some sort of traumatic brain injury, and they're not getting the help that they need because mental health is so stigmatized still within the military. It just creates prolonged chronic mental illness and issues within their relationships and their employment, and they have trouble getting jobs, and oftentimes they develop substance abuse issues, and it's just kind of this cycle. And 2.1 million vets received treatment through the VA from 2006 to 2010, and that's, I mean, it's really just not a lot when you think about how many people are actually in the military. The military needs to do a better job of taking care of their people and taking it more seriously when somebody has experienced any type of trauma. When 30% of the people who are coming home from combat develop some sort of mental illness within 3 to 4 months, something needs to change. 25% of returning Iraq and Afghanistan veterans develop some sort of substance abuse disorder because they're self-medicating and they're developing maladaptive coping skills to help them try and cope with the anxiety and the depression and the post-traumatic stress disorder and the complex post-traumatic stress disorder, depending on how many times that they've deployed. And there's no way that they're not going to come back different. There's no way that the things that they see and the operations and the missions that they accomplish aren't going to change them. I wanted to do this video because I wanted to try and just put the message out there that it is okay if you are in the military and you need help. That getting help for your mental health does not make you weak. It does not make you incapable of taking care of the mission. It does not mean that you cannot be a valuable member of the military. It means that you're human. And it means that you've been through a lot of things that a lot of other people haven't been through. And, 22 veterans die every day from suicide. That suicide rate is 1.5 times higher than it is for non-military members. I can't help but think that that's because we're not giving our veterans the things that they need when they get home. It's okay to take care of yourself, even if there is a mission. And I know that that kind of goes against what the military drills into us, but it's so important. How can we be effective if we're not okay? And I want to one day do more in order to help the vets, because I relate to them. I don't necessarily relate to the things that they've been through, but sometimes knowing that the person that you're sitting across from in a therapy session is a veteran can be helpful in itself. A long-term goal of mine is to kind of open up a co-op specifically for veterans. So kind of like the VA, but not the VA. And just having an alternative place where vets can go to get medical and mental health treatment, but they're served by veterans. I really hope that if you're a veteran and you're watching this, that if you feel like something's off and you feel like you want to talk, I just want to try and encourage you to do that, because it's important and you're important, and the things that you went through are real and they're valid, and you should be able to process them in a safe environment. So thanks for watching me ramble. I promise next week's video will be a little bit more informational. If you are a military member, like this video. If you haven't subscribed and you're just kind of lurking, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when I post a new video every week. Thank you so much for watching. I think that you are all amazing, and I love you all, and we'll be back next week.